Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Dan Banchero Show. I'm your host, and still a major league piece of work, Dan Banchero, coming to you live from the beautiful San Mateo Central Park. And, I used to take Stella here to go play at the park and chase her around. We play Scary Monster and Little Princess and Little Fairy, and I chase her all over the place, and we go on the slide and throw her around, and we'd have a good old time. Can't believe it's already been 18 months since they've been moved over to Arizona. So this is a little bit nostalgic for me, if I might say. But so last week we talked about 2007 and the party being over for DTM. And if you listened and watched what I expressed in last week's segment, one might ask, how could a sorry SOB like that change his life around and be inspired to behave in different ways in order to get some peace and be a better citizen? Well, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So this week I brought along the teachings of Lao Tzu here, the unknown teachings of Lao Tzu, I should say. The Hua Hu Ching. It's by Brian Walker. It's a little book I picked up. It's 81 verses. It's a simple read. You can probably knock it out in an afternoon. But it's basically a bunch of proverbs with some great wisdom in it. Lao Tzu also wrote the Tao Te Ching that I've spoken about in numerous episodes, which I paid close attention to in 2008 when I started making this little psychic change for the most part. And also, one of my favorites, another easy read, The Voice of Knowledge by the great Don Miguel Ruiz. Now, so in 2008, I got out of the Diablo Valley Ranch in Clayton, and I moved back to Burlingame. Sean had taken my belongings from my old apartment and moved us to another location. We were subleasing a apartment from some friends of hers, and I came out early in the week. I believe it was January the 2nd, and that Friday night I went out to Mountain Mike's in San Mateo with Baker and Jen and Shauna. We had some pizza, talked about my experience in the ranch and what my plan was going from there. Like I said, I was reading the teachings of Lao Tzu through Wayne Dyer's essays and Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And I was praying, I was reading the Proverbs every day in the Bible. So there's 31 Proverbs in the Bible, right? So depending on the date of the month, I would take that proverb for that date and I'd read it, and I'd try to concentrate on that. I began attending some groups in Foster City at the library and some other groups in San Carlos, and they gave me some support. I went back a few days a week to work at Leonardo's Cafe in Millbrae after I had cleaned up my act, and I was also seeking a new career at the time. I eventually got hired at Jamba Juice, and I trained in San Francisco over on 9th and Irving for about 6 weeks, but they had planned on moving me to the Stanford University location eventually. I remember I had all these new experiences and new feelings. When you put down the booze after 10 years of daily drinking, and I'm talking like 10 to 20 drinks a day, you're in this whole other world, and you're seeing things a lot more clear. You're being less impulsive, and I was able to make some sound decisions, and I was finding out all the stuff about myself that I didn't know. I remember we went to Las Vegas sober. It had about 90 days at the time. WWE was having the No Way Out event in Las Vegas, and I got to see Nature Boy Ric Flair take on MVP in the Intercontinental Championship match. He defeated him in one of his final pay-per-views before he retired at WrestleMania later on that year. And we got to go see Louis Anderson, a stand-up comedian, and during the show, for some reason, the topic came up of people not drinking or using drugs or clean and sober, and he asked anybody to stand up who had some time, and I stood up, and the crowd gave me a standing ovation, and Louis came down, gave me an autographed copy of his book, The F Word, and that made me feel good. So we had a good time in Vegas. We ate at some fancy restaurants, saw a couple shows, and life was looking pretty good right off the bat. I remember later on that month, I think it maybe had been March, APW, it's an independent wrestling faction. They had a show out in Fremont, and I got to go out and meet some of my favorite wrestlers when I was younger. Got to see the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Got to meet Tito Santana and RVD, among others, like the Honky Tonk Man. So I was like a little kid again, you know, no booze, and seeing some of my heroes growing up. It's kind of cool. So we eventually moved into a little duplex in San Mateo on 23rd Avenue in San Mateo. And an old high school friend, she happened to be the neighbor next door. And things were looking really good. It was a cute little place, nice little garden in the front, a little patio in the back, and it was cozy, you know. Sean and I had a great time. We'd cook some meals together and have some nice dinners on our nights off. Man, she could really cook. She could make the best spaghetti and meatballs, and she'd make this also for me. It was this Mexican meatball soup that she was really good at. And, you know, she'd do her thing in the kitchen, and, yeah, we had a good time. We'd wrap up the nights. We'd go over to Borders. It's closed now, but it's a bookstore that used to be on El Camino there by TGI Fridays. And we'd go over there and we'd read, and she'd get her soy latte, and I'd have my iced coffee, and we'd sit and we'd read, and we'd stay there for a couple hours, and I'd have the time to contemplate and space out and kind of look around and people watch, and I started getting some great peace out of this. You know, it wasn't like me going over to the CBG and the Alibi and, you know, all these other joints I used to hang out at and have a way different experience. We started watching Netflix together, and we were watching. I got turned on to the Office with Steve Carell. The great B.L. Lambrix referred it to me, and I started watching it, and we got into that. We were watching Married with Children and Cheers, and of course the Golden Girls and Seinfeld, and I threw in a little Dick Van Dyke, and we watched every episode, start to finish, on most of those DVD. So Sean would be at work sometimes at night, and here and there I'd pop into the bars where my friends were hanging out at O'Neill's or where have you, and I'd check in and say hello to people. You know, I'd stay for a few minutes and I'd leave usually within 30 minutes. It just wasn't my scene anymore. But I did miss my friends, and yeah, it was good to check in, but there was no purpose for me there anymore. You know, being in a relationship and not drinking, there's really no point. I remember Ric Flair was fighting Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania in 2008, and it was his final match, and he was going to retire after he lost. And Paul came over, Paulie, and we watched it together. And Phil showed up later on, and I watched the fight over again on the replay, and we hung out. And, you know, so things were changing. Yeah, I was really a big wrestling fan back then, and you know, my favorite guy, Nature Boy, was retiring, and so I wasn't as interested as I was after that, but I'd still head over to the donut shop there in Burlingame or Starbucks, and to get back into the readings of Wayne Dyer. I got into some of his other books like Real Magic and Pulling Your Own Strings and Your Erroneous Zones, and I'd be highlighting and you know, making little notes inside the paper on the books there, and I was gaining knowledge about myself, and I was trying to figure out ways to apply these things, you know, because I was just trying to become this new guy. I felt great. I mean, I was going through life in a really, really good mood. You know, I was kind of proud of myself. So I was hooked on all these self-improvement books and gaining more self-knowledge. I just felt better, you know. So in the Hua Hu Ching, on page 19. This little passage kind of caught my eye based on what I was just sharing with you. Verse 16 in the Hua Hu Ching, Brian Walker's translation, it says, most of the world's religions serve only to strengthen attachments to false concepts such as self and other, life and death, heaven and earth, and so on. Those who become entangled in these false ideals are prevented from perceiving the integral oneness. The highest virtue one can exercise is to accept the responsibility of discovering and transmitting the whole truth. Some help others in order to receive blessings and admiration. This is simply meaningless. Some cultivate themselves in part to serve others, in part to serve their own pride. They will understand at best half of the truth. But those who improve themselves for the sake of the world, to these the whole truth of the universe will be revealed. So seek the whole truth, practice it in your daily life, and humbly share it with others. You'll enter the realm of the divine. I really like that little passage there. Now, as far as the voice of knowledge is concerned, we never really know what people's motives are. We don't know what people are doing. We don't know what they're thinking. I had this delusional way of thinking back in the day, and even people who are watching this show, you're gonna get a bunch of different emotions. You're gonna get a little comedy based on the mistakes I've made and the situations I put myself in. You're gonna get a little drama as a result as well. You might catch a little wisdom based on the stuff that I read you, that I found out, and you might be able to get these books and apply it to your life. You might even get a little bit angry with me. Some of you might not even pick up the phone or return any of my texts or even allow me into your home after watching some of these episodes going forward. But that's all right, because I know what my intention is, and it's to show the evolution of the disaster to wellness, back to disaster, and then back to wellness. But it's going to take a few weeks. So what I wanted to do here was get into this voice of knowledge here. And this little passage here is really cool. So yeah, we don't really know what's going on, how people perceive things. Based on our experiences in life, one person might recognize something a completely different way that I recognize them. So I had to learn how to accept that. Because if I don't accept that people might have had past experiences that change their thinking and the way they perceive, then I'm being in a state of unacceptance. And if I'm in a state of unacceptance, I might eventually get to a state of resentment and then put myself in danger to react to life and not have a peaceful life. So once I got this understanding based on these few sentences here, this gave me a little bit more clarity. Check this out. This is from The Voice of Knowledge, page 57 to 58, chapter 5, The Storyteller, by Don Miguel Ruiz. I had been living a story of my own creation of my entire life without even noticing it. Once I had this awareness, I started to question everything in my story. Is it true that I am what I believe I am? Is what I believe about everybody else true? I reviewed the story of my life, and I didn't like the drama that I created. I wanted to reinvent myself. Now that describes me in 2007 moving into this year. I wanted to reinvent myself, but how was I going to do it? Now this is really good here too, because this helps me take responsibility for my actions and how what I do and say has an integral part in how my life is going to go and how others are going to perceive me. Check this out. This is on page 61. The main character who lives in my story is based on what I agree to believe about myself. I project my image to other people in society, and other people perceive that projection, modify it, and react to me according to their stories. I discovered that because it's my story, I also create an image for every secondary character that lives in my story. The secondary characters are based on people who really exist, but everything I believe about them is the story of my own creation. It took me some time for me to understand that I only know the story I create about myself. So I don't know, it's impossible for me to get behind the eyeballs of another human being. But through changing my character, sincerely, earnestly, I might be able to affect the way they perceive it and look at me. Going forward, this is on page 62. For years, I thought that I only knew myself until I discovered that I was not the truth. I only knew what I believed about myself. Then I discovered I am not what I believe I am. And it was very interesting and also frightening when I discovered that I really didn't know anybody and they don't know me either. It's pretty good stuff. I really like that book. Really, really like it. It's a must read as far as I'm concerned. All right. So, going forward, so I started getting reacquainted with some of my friends who I said were kind of not so interested in hanging out with me too much anymore because my alcoholism and drug addiction was getting a little bit out of control and my behavior was deplorable. So I started getting to go hang out and play cards again. Me, Danny, and Brian, and Tony, we like to play a little Pedro, and we started playing almost weekly. We'd play all hours of the night, and we were very competitive, and we still love that game to this day. But back in 2008, going into 2009, we were really, really getting into it, and it felt great. Gary from the deli, he was asking one of the guys, what it was like hanging out in this new state of sobriety, and they told him that it was like hanging out with an old man. So I didn't know how I should take that, but you know, I guess it's a good quality as opposed to having nobody around and, you know, being a wild man. So anyway, after I get off work, like I mentioned, I got a few hours at the deli here and there before I got into Jamba Juice. I started going over to the Gerhardt household, and I'd have a little coffee with Don to talk about sobriety and other stuff and how my life is changing, and he was giving me his experience. You know, he'd bust my chops, he thought I was full of shit, and if there was an opportunity for him not to, Jen would slip in after work and she'd go ahead and break my balls one way or another, as usual. So my relationships were going smooth again, and you know, eventually Danny would start a softball team with D. Philippus Tile, and a bunch of the guys from high school got together and we put together a team. I was lousy. I usually batted at the end of the lineup, and I'd go 1 for 3 with a single and drive in no runs. And I was lucky to even get any of those hits. But it's just good to hang out with the guys again and be out in the field and hang out. I believe I played 2 seasons. It wasn't pretty. Anyway, now the struggle we had with this new person is I was such a codependent and a useless individual when I was drinking and using drugs. Shauna was going through this transition where she wasn't used to, you know, seeing me as this independent person, and there was times where I feel that she may have felt unwanted or unloved, and it was frustrating for her. And I wasn't as intimate sometimes because, you know, when I'm coked out, hammered, back in the day, sex was all that was on my mind, like I said. So she's adapting to this person who's new in sobriety, and I wasn't as wild and sexual as I was before. But don't worry, that would come back. So that's another story. So for another episode. So we were having some struggles with this, and it was causing some friction in our relationship. And you know, I didn't know how to explain it to her, but I assured her that my feelings hadn't changed, and you know, I felt obligated to being with her, being all she had done for me. Shauna got me into rehab through a friend of hers that referred me. She took care of all my stuff, and I wasn't about to just go out and bail on her. I wanted to make it work. So we had some hard times, but she still did a great job in that kitchen, and we still read together, and you know, we'd go for walks and do whatever we did, and we found peace one way or another. So I'm at Jamba Juice, Stanford. It was a very intense job, believe it or not, and it wasn't exactly the job for me, let's just say. I got kids stealing money out of the safe. I got kids not showing up for work. I got kids stealing product. I got no air conditioning. Hot days in the summertime, I'd have the windows open and the doors open. The flies are coming in. I got yogurt melting, frozen fruit melting. Huge mess. My GM, she wasn't very responsible. I was the assistant general manager. She'd take off early to beat traffic, lie on her time card in the system, and leave me with this disaster. So this went on for a few months, and I had all these kids who are young, and they're in their partying days, and they're using drugs and drinking and having sex and all this other stuff, and they're inviting me out to go with them, and I refrained from doing all that, luckily. But it was like October or so, and I couldn't take it anymore, and I gave my 2 weeks notice, and I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a job lined up, and it caused some worry from Shauna's point of view. But I got it together. I got a little job at TGI Fridays. I took a job as a host with the intention of being a server. It was about time that I got into full dining service, and eventually Gary got me some hours again, being that I had almost a year sober at the time. And yeah, I went through server training, and I was there for about 5 weeks, and then TGI Fridays went out of business, unfortunately. And but one of the things that did happen when I was there is I got reconnected with my buddy Eddie Pinales, and I would, you know, hang out with him here and there, and I'd get to engage with him and his soon-to-be wife, and so that was I got a little reconnection there. He just moved back to San Mateo, a few blocks away from us, and so yeah, I remember I went back to Diablo Valley Ranch in Clayton to get my 1-year chip on November 4th, 2008, and my sister came out. She made the drive out, and I believe my Aunt Lisa and my cousins Justin and Trevor were there. My mom couldn't show up for traffic purposes, and Shauna came, and I got my 1-year chip. I got to do a little speech, and it was one of the great moments of my life. I was really excited, and I felt like I was doing the right thing. I had a lot of self-esteem. I remember looking out in the crowd and seeing my sister crying, and she was proud too. So I was pretty happy. It was a very moving moment. So the day that TGI Fridays goes out of business, I take my check and I run over to Red Robin in Foster City, San Mateo, over there at the Bridgepoint shopping area. Took a job there as a server and began a new chapter in my life there at the end of the year. I was working a little bit more at the deli again, and so I had 2 jobs, and it all worked out because my intentions were good. And yeah, I had a little fear at first of quitting a job, or losing a job also later on, but they weren't alcohol related, thank God. The universe conspired in other ways, and things went down the way they did. But we got to find ourselves, man. We got to have good intentions. And 2008 was a good year. It was a peaceful year for the most part. It was a change year. I got into reading books, and it's been 10 years of this now, and I haven't always applied the knowledge, as you will see in the upcoming episodes, but it all came back full circle, thank God. And I'm back to where I was at in 2008. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to close with the other verse here from the Hua Hu Ching. If you ever get this book by Brian Walker, this is on page 48. It's verse 40. The natural laws of the universe are inviolable. Energy condenses into substance. Food is eaten through the mouth and not the nose. A person who neglects to breathe will turn blue and die. Some things simply can't be dismissed. It is also a part of the cosmic law that what you say and do determines what happens in your life. The ordinary person thinks that this law is external to himself, and he feels confined and controlled by it. So his desires trouble his mind troubles his spirit, and he lives in constant turmoil with himself and the world. His whole life is spent in struggling. The superior person recognizes that he and the subtle law are one. Therefore, he cultivates himself to accord with it, bringing moderation to his actions and clarity to his mind. Doing this, he finds himself at one with all that is divine and enlightened. His days are passed drinking in serenity and breathing out contentment. This is the proud and simple truth. You are the master of your life and death. What you do is what you are. So, today I'm at peace because what I do is seek peace. If you're seeking lust, you'll get lust. If you're seeking friction, you'll get friction. That's just what I've witnessed in this world. And if you seek comedy, find Dan Banchero. Anyway, The Voice of Knowledge, Don Miguel Ruiz. The Unknown Teachings of Lao Tzu by Brian Walker. The Hua Hu Ching. Pick these books up. I'm telling you, you'll feel better. And that's the goal. So until next time, here's to feeling good all the time. I'm Dan Banchero, and have a great week. Next week, 2009, we're going to talk a little bit about the birth of Stella. All right, later on.